Good morning, everyone. I just want to take a moment to make sure that everyone is able to hear me. So if someone could just type in the chat to let me know that I am being heard, that would be very helpful. I know we had a little bit of a technical issue. Perfect. I'm seeing yes. Technical issue last time, so we want to make sure that everything is good this time. So thank you all for joining us. Welcome to the second Achieve Office Hours call. We are extremely excited to be with all of you. We know that you came ready with your questions, so we're also excited to answer and address some of those and to provide you with the support that you need. Our third call, just as a reminder, will take place next Friday on April 30th at, again, the same time, 10 a.m. And just to reiterate, so everyone on the call is aware, so the purpose of these calls is really truly just to provide you with the support that you need to address some of the questions that you have as you're planning within your school systems to allocate and budget for these SR2 and SR3 funds. So we're going to provide you with just a few updates, but then a majority of this call will be for purposes of addressing your questions. Once our questions on the call are all submitted and we do cease to receive more questions, if it's before the 11 a.m. end time, we will still end the call, again, if all questions have been addressed. If we do end the call, and of course there are questions resuming after the call, you can feel free to just shoot us an email at the help desk email, which we will go over in just a second. So here's just, again, some of the information about the questions. As a reminder here, there's an Achieve FAQ document that you can access through our website. And there is the email address that I know all of you are very familiar with, but ldoe.grantshelpdesk@la.gov. If you have questions specific to SR2, SR3 funds, we're going to ask that you just type in the subject line, the word achieve, so that we can filter those out and make sure we're addressing them and putting them at the forefront of our list. So our agenda for today, we do have some new information for you, so that's exciting, and hopefully it'll address a lot of your questions that you've been sending in. I do want to just take one slide to recap for those of you who were unable to attend the meeting last time, our office hours, what was captured within those office hours, and provide you with a slide with easy access to the link of the deck. Then we're going to go into, here's the exciting part, evidence-based intervention guidance. We know that there have been a multitude of questions. We've been receiving them from school systems. So we've been working hard as a department to make sure that we're developing the guidance that we feel will help you to plan for those funds, that 20% of SR3 EB funds, to do what's best for your students within your school systems. Then we'll get into one slide on pre-approval request. We'll review just the timeline to make sure everybody's on the same page, and then we will take your questions as they come in. So the office hours recap, again, last Friday we had office hours. If you were not able to join, these are the things that we discussed. In a nutshell, we just provided basic information. Again, a reminder of the 20% of SR3 EB funds. We also discussed SR3 reopening plans and the requirement for school systems to capture that public comment on those plans. And then lastly, we went into the initiative updates within the Achieve guidance document. And there were 3 specific initiatives that we provided updates on. All of these were from our teaching and learning team, and they were relevant to staffing and scheduling 2.0, school improvement best practices, and school support institutes. Like I mentioned before, the deck is accessible here on the slide for you to last week's office hours. If you need anything else from us, of course, just email us at the help desk and we'll take care of that for you. So on the next slide, we're going to get into the good stuff. I'm sure that's going to, again, answer a lot of the questions you have in reference to SR3, and that 20% of funds that as per ed has to be allocated to evidence-based activities. So as we discussed last time, these funds are really for the purpose of allocating to address learning loss that's been caused by the pandemic and by students being out of school. So loss of learning being addressed by the implementation of evidence-based interventions specifically. So the intervention should respond to the social, emotional, academic needs of students, and they should address, again, the impact of COVID-19 on those different underrepresented subgroups. We've been through this before, but just to reiterate and lay the foundation for our discussion that we're going to get into on the new guidance document from our department, We want to make sure that all school systems have an understanding of those underrepresented student groups. Each major racial and ethnic group, children from low-income families, our children with disabilities, our English learners, students of different genders, of course, migrant students, students experiencing homelessness, and then our students who are in foster care. So we have developed, as I mentioned before, a new guidance document, which is accessible here for you. And it's within also the pandemic relief guidance resource library. So within the next few slides, we're going to actually get into what's within that guidance document, what support we've provided through that, and then what our expectations are as a department as far as next steps. So within the evidence-based intervention guidance, we have provided just some basic information at the top. So this goes back to the Every Student Succeeds Act. We provide a definition of what ED refers to as evidence-based. We have also provided information, which I'm sure you're familiar with, relevant to the levels of evidence from ESSA. And so just as a reminder, those are strong evidence, moderate evidence, promising evidence, and then demonstrates a rationale. So we have provided those terms, but also the definitions from ED relevant to those terms. So we have also, underneath that basic information, provided school systems with clearinghouses that ED has pushed out through their different resources and different websites. And the 4 clearinghouses in this table that you see on the slide is actually from the guidance document that we have produced on evidence-based interventions. From that table, you'll see there are 4 different clearinghouses. So the first one being the What Works Clearinghouse, and it provides you with the description of each, the Promising Practices Network, Blueprints for Healthy Youth Development, and then lastly, social programs that work. So all interventions, again, that ED has approved as evidence-based interventions are accessible within those 4 clearinghouses. So what the department is recommending is that school systems look at the interventions that are listed within those clearinghouses, but also take into consideration the initiatives that the department has released already through the Achieve guidance document. Of course, the initiatives that we have pushed out are research and evidence-based, and they have also been vetted by the department. So if a school system determines that there is an intervention from within the 4 clearinghouses that they would like to allocate these funds, or if they would like to allocate some of these SR3 EB funds, the 20%, to an initiative from the Achieve guidance document, those would both be approved for the use of those funds. If there is an intervention that is not within the clearinghouse list, or an intervention, an initiative that is not within the actual Achieve guidance document, we're asking school systems to provide us with a little bit more information. And that's what you see there in the third bullet. So for this portion of it, we know that school systems will most likely need some support in order to plan for the use of those funds if they're not seeing an intervention, again, within the clearinghouses, or wanting to put the allocated funds towards one of the initiatives in Achieve. So if that is the case, we are allowing our school systems to, of course, contact us through the LDOE Grants Help Desk email. And we are asking at this point that you change your subject line a little bit. So instead of putting Achieve in the subject line, we would like you to type in the subject, evidence-based interventions. And by doing that, we'll be able to filter all of those emails specifically towards evidence-based interventions. And we are actually going to connect with you personally in order to provide you with support relevant to the requests that you need and the help that you need for evidence-based interventions. So one of the things here that would be required if you are a school system looking at interventions or initiatives, again, outside of the clearinghouses or outside of the Achieve guidance documents, is you'll have to keep on hand for your filing purposes, if there is an audit at some point, the research to support and back the initiative or the evidence-based initiative, evidence-based intervention that you would like to purchase with these funds, so that you have that documentation on file. We are also asking school system, if that is the case, that you upload that information to EGMS through the upload portion of the EGMS application for Achieve. We wanted to remind school systems too, as you see on the second bullet here on the slide, that within the overview page of the Achieve application in EGMS, there is a link to a document that provides you with information relevant to evidence-based interventions. So that information is there for you as well. So we've already addressed the first bullet, but the second bullet on this slide, we just wanted to simply remind school systems of what they should be considering when planning for the implementation of evidence-based interventions. And that really there's four main things here to strategically plan for. It's addressing communication. So once an intervention is determined, how is the school system addressing the communication and relaying the information relevant to the selection of the intervention to stakeholders that will be utilizing the intervention and interacting with the intervention? The second is planning professional development. So what type of professional development will our teachers, our leaders, district and school leaders need relevant to that intervention? The third is developing implementation guidance. So how should teachers, how should school leaders, how should they be implementing this actual intervention, and what is the expectation of the school system? And then the fourth thing is determining and sharing progress monitoring expectations with our schools within your system to ensure that all of them understand how we're going to be progress monitoring that intervention to ensure that the student outcomes are moving in the right direction. So that's the information relevant to the evidence-based interventions. And I know we're probably going to have some questions come up within the portion of the Q&A of this. So we'll address those at this time. There is one slide, like I mentioned initially in starting this presentation, relevant to pre-approval request, relevant to the capital expenditures. And so we wanted to make sure, because we've also been receiving some questions related to the pre-approval process, that if you are requesting expenditures that include general equipment purchases, vans, buses, portable buildings, land purchases, building purchases, or improvements to some of your equipment that are respective to land and buildings, just to increase the value or the life of those particular things, that you do in fact have to go through a pre-approval process. So we have placed a link here, you'll see that in the 3 bullet, to the pre-approval form. It was shared in the LDOE newsletter, and you see the date of it being shared there, but you can also access this through the FSGR library. So please make sure, again, if you are requesting any of those expenditures, that you complete that pre-approval request form. We also wanted to clarify here that if you are requesting an expenditure for certain things, you will not need a pre-approval process. And again, we've received some questions on this. So some of those things that you will not need to go through the pre-approval process on are specific equipment purchases. Some examples of those are smart boards and servers. And then second, the request for these, if you are requesting those types of information, you don't have to go through the pre-approval process, but you do have to make sure that you're including this within the budget detail of your application so that we can provide you with the approval necessary for those particular requests. So there's a note at the bottom, but if you have received, because this has been a big question too, an approval for a pre-approval request prior to your submission of your Achieve application, you do need to upload the pre-approval on the budget detail page. If you have not received the pre-approval, you just need to indicate on the expenditure description that you are awaiting the approval from LDOE. So you can still continue on with completing your budget and your application, but just make sure that either number one, you're submitting the pre-approval within the appropriate page, or number two, you're letting us know that you are waiting on that pre-approval from our department. And before we get into Q&A, the very last thing that we want to just remind everyone, we've discussed this before, but there is a soft deadline for Achieve budget applications to be submitted through EGMS on May 3rd. We did have a time frame of April 30th, but we do want to clarify that date is May 3rd. This is a soft deadline. So what do we mean by a soft deadline? We have said as a department that if we receive the application from your school system by May 3rd, our team will be reviewing the application, and you see the date of June 1 on this slide. Your school system would be able to begin getting the approval and drawing down funds by June 1st. So with the soft deadline, if your school system does not get your application in by May 3rd, and let's say you get it in by May 15th, we cannot as a department say that we will be able to review and approve your budget and approve your application to be able to allow you to draw down the funds by June 1st. So again, this is a soft deadline, but in order to have access to the funds and have approval by June 1st, we are requiring that school systems get that in, the applications in by May 3rd. We are still, because I know this has been a question too, we are still working on the date for the release of the additional SR3 funds, that 80%. So we will get that information out as soon as we have determined that actual date. And lastly, just support. So these are the same links you've seen last time, a reminder of the LDOE Grants Help Desk. But do remember, we have the Pandemic Relief Library where you can access all of the resources and all of the guidance information relevant to Achieve as well as Believe for our early childhood folks. So we are going to transition now to the Q&A portion. I'm going to stop right here, check the chat, and we will voice over all of our questions and responses. Okay, we did have a simple question of, can we provide the link to the actual deck for today? That was posted at the beginning of the presentation, but I have reposted it into the chat if you did not see it at the initial point of the chat. I know there's a lot in there now, so please feel free to click that link and access the deck. It is also, of course, accessible through the Pandemic Relief website. For the questions as well as the response that we do have. So the question was, is the purchase of smart boards and teacher laptops considered evidence-based if it supports high-quality learning models? So the response to that is, smart boards and other technology have to be aligned with an evidence-based practice to be an allowable expenditure for EB funds. Purchasing technology outside of the alignment would not be an allowable EB expenditure. Okay. We're working through some of the other questions, so just hang tight, give us a minute, and we'll be back with responses. Okay, so we have a few more responses at this point. And one of the questions that also came in is, what if a school wishes to use some of the intervention funds to hire new intervention staff members? Does that fall under Achieve and is allowable, or do we need to email evidence-based intervention to the help desk? So the response there is, school systems will have to identify the evidence-based strategy or practice that would warrant the hiring of the interventionist to be an allowable 20% evidence-based activity. However, it is an allowable SR2 expenditure. Another question that we had, can salary stipends for personnel to implement those interventions be used? Specifically, interventionist salaries, summer school teacher stipends, etc. The response here is school systems will have to identify, again, the evidence-based strategy, intervention, or practice that would warrant the staff to be hired with the 20% of evidence-based funds for the particular activity, strategy, practice, or intervention. This, however, again, would be an SR2 allowability. We had another question, is the pre-approval form for all ESSA funding or just evidence-based? And so the response here is it is for all all SR3 or ESSA funding. So the pre-approval form is for all ESSA funding, not just evidence-based, not just ESSA2 or ESSA3, all ESSA funding. Another question, pre-approval isn't required for smart boards. What about student laptops used for interventions? So the response here is specific purpose equipment, such as laptops, smart pads, iPads, smart boards, iPads. They do not require the pre-approval process. Those expenditures should be included in the budget detail and in the appropriate object code. We also had a comment that one of the links on a slide is not working to the clearinghouses. So we will make sure that we update those links immediately following this and then make the update within the deck that is, again, accessible through the Pandemic Relief Library. So thank you for making us aware of that. And again, we will address it immediately following this call. All right, we're going to take just one more minute to get some questions in and provide responses to other questions we still have in our chat. All right, so one other question has come in that we need to address here. Is the purchase of smart boards and teacher laptops considered evidence-based if it supports high-quality instruction and hybrid learning models? And the response is smart boards and other technology have to be aligned with an evidence-based practice to be an allowable expenditure for the evidence-based ESSA3 funds. Purchasing technology outside of the alignment would not be an allowable evidence-based expenditure. So school systems can use ESSA2 funds for these types of purchases. But again, in order to utilize the evidence-based funds, it has to be associated with the expenditure of the evidence-based activity, practice, or intervention. Okay, another question. What if a school system wishes to use some of the intervention funds to hire new intervention staff members? Does that fall under achieve or is it allowable? And the response is school systems, again, will have to identify the evidence-based strategy to warrant the hiring of the interventionist. Do air quality upgrades to an existing HVAC system need to go through the pre-approval process? The response to that is yes. This needs to go through the pre-approval process if it will be considered a capital expenditure and be over $5,000. Okay, give us one more moment. We're still working through some questions. We'll be back in a moment. Okay, at this point, we have 2 more questions to address. We're still working through a few more. If we are planning to use the funds not yet released to complete projects for which we are requesting pre-approval, will this delay the pre-approval because it is not completely funded through funds allowed to be budgeted? The response to that is no. The agency encourages school systems to consider long-range plans for your ESSA and ARP funds when submitting pre-approval activities, so it will not delay the pre-approval protocols. Another question that we received is, must the full SR3 allocation be spent on evidence-based practices? So if this question is in response to or is regarding the 20% of evidence-based funds that school systems are currently being allocated, then yes, ED requires that 20% of SR3 EB funds be allocated to evidence-based interventions to address the learning loss of students due to COVID-19. However, as I mentioned on one of the timeline slides, you will be receiving additional SR3 funds. And so those allowabilities will be much like SR2, and it will not be specific to the evidence-based interventions. Okay, give us a few more moments. We're working through some more and we're getting more in the chat. So we're gonna log those into our questions and we'll get back with you in just a moment. Okay, so we have someone asking for us to repeat the response relevant to salaries and stipends for personnel being used in order to implement the interventions that will be used specifically for summer school when it comes to summer school teacher stipends. So can SR3 EB funds be used towards those summer school teacher stipends? And so the response that we provided to this was school systems will have to identify still the evidence-based strategy that would warrant the hiring of those staff members for it to be an allowable 20% of those evidence-based funds for SR3. It is, though, for those salaries, an allowable expense for SR2. So again, if your school system would like to use these funds for the hiring of staff to support summer school interventions, then you would need to still identify which evidence-based interventions for those 20% of the funds. If an evidence-based intervention is not identified, the SR2 funds will allow this to be an expense that school districts can budget. But in order to use SR3, school systems will need to identify an evidence-based intervention for funds to be allocated towards and approved for the purpose of positions and salaries for summer school interventions. Another one we have, if we are not planning to use these funds until next year, can we wait until July to enter the budget so we don't have to enter it in fiscal year 2020, 2021 and 21-22? So the response here is the Achieve application is a multi-year application. All budgeting for the duration of the grant will occur in the current 2020-2021 application. Another question, can examples be provided of SR3 allowabilities that are associated and aligned with evidence-based interventions? And again, we've developed the guidance document, so please review that guidance document that we produced today and provided to you today. And then so you can email the help desk if you have specific questions relevant to interventions, and we can get you the support that you need. Give us one more moment. We're working through some additional questions. Okay, so another question, we have itemized the tier 1 curriculum that we had in redesign since our funding has ended. Is that an allowable expense? And the response here is this would be allowable for SR2 expenditures as long as the curriculum materials align with addressing activities associated with COVID. Okay, so at this point, we are not seeing any more questions in the chat. We will give folks about a minute or two more to enter any more questions you may have. In the event there are no questions that come in, we're going to go ahead and close out the call, but again, giving about 1 or 2 more minutes to put questions into the chat for us to address. Okay, so we had a question, are SEL coaches an approved intervention? This response is going to be very similar to the other responses we have provided in relation to paying for salaries. So you would still need to identify the evidence-based practice, intervention, or strategy that those coaches will be implementing in order for this to be an allowable expense for SR3. However, this would be an allowable expense regardless of you identifying the actual strategy or practice or intervention with SR2 funds. So we're going to give 1 more minute. I've gone through the chat again. I do not think there are any that we missed. So just 1 more minute for folks if you have any outstanding questions to get those into the chat. All right, so we had a question come in. When will we know if we are approved, if our strategy is approved, so that we can hire staff if needed? And so the question here is, school system would know if your budget has been approved or your application has been approved by June 1 if you submit the application to the department by May 3rd. So again, that is a soft deadline, but that is the deadline that we are saying if we receive your application by May 3rd, you will have an approval status by June 1st. All right, and we've had one more question come in. Is there a level of evidence that is required to be included in SR3 funding? And so we mentioned this when we reviewed the new evidence-based guidance document that we've produced. The 4 levels of evidence as per ESSA and ED are within the guidance document for you to reference. So the answer here is yes, the levels of evidence are within that guidance document. You'll see the 4 levels. Any intervention falling within any 4 of those levels is an allowable expenditure. Okay, we do not have any other questions in the chat. And we do now, so give us one moment and we'll be back with you. All right, so we have a question of what about using evidence for ESSA? So the response here is, although the agency has not stressed this practice for ESSA outside of redesign activities, it is required for the use of ESSA funding as well. There is guidance from ED relevant to evidence, again, for ESSA. And so because it is information from ED for those purposes, the department is also looking at that, those levels of evidence in terms of ESSA, so that school systems have some type of knowledge, idea, and guidance for purposes of determining where the interventions fall when it comes to those different levels of evidence that have, again, already been identified by ED. So question, where can we find the evidence-based allowability document? And so this is in the guidance that we pushed out today, but it's also, if you go to the Pandemic Relief Library, the Louisiana Believes site, you'll be able to access all of the evidence allowability documents as well. You can also access the just general allowabilities documents, the examples of allowabilities. There's a multitude of resources that are within that Pandemic Relief Library page. So please make sure that you're visiting that. If you need assistance with getting to that page, of course, you can email Grants Help Desk. All right, so it's looking like we have no more questions at this time. There are 20 minutes left on the call. I am going to just give about 30 more seconds to make sure we are finalized here. I think we have addressed all of the questions. I'll give us just about 30 more seconds. All right, it looks like we have one final question that came in. And so that question is, does the 20% of evidence-based spending have to come from the 20% of ESSA 3 amount in EGMS currently? And so the response here is yes. The 20% of SR3 evidence-based funds is what has been already allocated to school systems within EGMS for you to budget. So school systems should be using the 20% of evidence-based SR3 funds towards these evidence-based interventions or practices that we've gone through today within the office hours deck. So please, again, look at that guidance document that we've pushed out today. And if you need any support, please email the grants help desk, ldwe.grantshelpdesk@la.gov. There are no more questions at this time. We're going to give you back 18 minutes of your day. So that's exciting stuff. If you do need us, like I mentioned, please email the help desk. We are here to support you. And we know that you are all working diligently and very hard in order to utilize these funds to support our students. We appreciate everything you are doing, and we hope you have a great Friday and a great weekend. Thank you all for joining us.